talk to you a lot about what's happened in my life and my story. Some of you, I recognize your faces from Miami. I was in Miami. I was also at the Dave Klein event. So I've seen some of you, but those of you I've not met, thank you for your service and thank you for being here. So as Susan said, I'm a daughter of a deceased Vietnam veteran. My dad's name was Bill Morris. He served in 1968 to 1969 near Benoit at the Long Binh base. He was there in the Army. He was told that if he enlisted, that they would keep him stateside for the 3 years instead of sending him off the war. He had finished almost all of his college. He was a semester away from completing his CPA. And when he told my mother, whom he was engaged to at the time, that he was leaving college, she said, "Bill, you know you'll be drafted." And he was. So, of course, after he enlisted, it took very little time for him to actually be sent to Vietnam. On his first day there in Vietnam, when he got off of the plane, he was basically made to fight a chemical fire without any protection. And so we don't know if that's when he was exposed, but it was everywhere. It was in the water. They made barbecue pits out of the barrels. They had clean equipment behind where he worked later. Are people having trouble hearing me? Because I'm seeing people. Oh, is it there's an echo? Is there? Okay, you guys are okay? I'm sorry. So anyhow, so we're not really sure how he was exposed, but he was there and he came home. And when he came home, my parents married 9 days before he had left, and so they were anxious to get on with their life. They wanted to start their family and get back into life and put the war behind them. My mother's had 2 miscarriages, and then like Susan said, I was born in 1972. I was born 2 months premature. I weighed 3 pounds, 4 ounces. I was missing my right leg below the knee and several of my fingers and my big toe on my left foot. My remaining 4 toes were actually webbed. So, I grew up, like I said, in Ohio. My mother has explained it as, she went into preterm labor, she went into the hospital, she was very thin. They said, "Honey, you don't even look pregnant." She says, "No, I'm delivering, I'm in labor." Basically, they rushed her in, I came out, and the first words out of a nurse's mouth were, "Oh my God, what did you do to this baby?" Oxygen mask comes down and she's out. So this was my grand entrance into the world. So the doctors told my parents that if they're that messed up on the inside or outside, they're going to be that messed up on the inside too. They told my parents that there was little chance that I would survive. My mother called the Lutheran pastor to come and baptize me because they were so unsure of my survival. However, there is another plan for me. So my parents became activists. My parents saw an interview or something that started talking about Agent Orange, and my parents wrote a letter, and they found out that there was Agent Orange, and this had happened. They became activists. They were actually the first to start the first chapter of Agent Orange International in Ohio, in the Akron-Canton, Ohio area. And during that time, before the first Agent Orange class action lawsuit, there was a lot of movement in the organizations and in the Agent Orange community, and there was a lot of positive forward movement. However, after the lawsuit settled in 1985, it destroyed the movement, mostly because some veterans thought that they would be taken care of, and others were already starting to become very seriously ill. So the veterans' cause and their illnesses took precedent over the illnesses and the birth defects in the children. I recently found an article from 1985 that suggested that during that time, when the 200,000 veterans who were part of the class action lawsuit, they had registered 56,000 children of their children who had been affected by Agent Orange birth defects. Where are all those children? That's one of my questions. Once the settlement happened, like I said, it killed the movement. And then in 1986, my dad, who was only 38 years old at the time, who was a steel worker, felt like he had a chest cold. He went to the infirmary and he found that he was being rushed to the hospital. He had to have emergency bypass surgery. At 38 years old, he had 5 bypasses on his heart. At age 40, he developed diabetes. At age 48, he had a stroke. I'm sorry. And at age 50, he died of a massive heart attack. In 1986, my father filed for the VA, complaining, saying that he believed that Agent Orange had caused these illnesses, and the VA denied him. It wasn't until 2011 they added ischemic heart disease to the list. Tragedy. I'm sorry. During the time in my town when my dad first became sick, I was being teased mercilessly because I was the only one like me. There was no one else in my small town who had a prosthetic limb, missing fingers, or a big toe. I never told my dad because of his PTSD. I didn't want to trigger him. I didn't want to make him more sick. I suffered in silence. After my dad died, I was just sickened about the whole thing. I put Agent Orange behind me. Then in 2002, I was contacted by Japanese filmmaker Misako Sakata to tell my story. She's the widow of a Vietnam veteran named Greg Davis, who is a very famous photojournalist. She came to my house to do a story, and when I was dropping her off at the airport, I said, well, before I dropped her off and I was saying goodbye to her, I had a flashback. I had a flashback of a manila folder that my parents had during their activism days. And in that manila folder, which my parents told me not to look in, which of course, when you tell a kid that, you look in it. So I opened the folder, and in the folder were Xerox copies of photographs of deformed children in jars. And under one of the photographs, in scrawled letters, in capital letters with 5 underlines under it, it said, "In Vietnam." And I looked at Misako and I said, if I had a chance, I would go to Vietnam. And 4 months later, I was on a plane, off to the land of my father's demons. And I've been to Vietnam 3 times, and I thought I was going to go see a bunch of 40-year-olds like me. But what I've found is the environmental damage of Agent Orange in Vietnam is continuing to cause children to be born with devastating birth defects. Currently here in the U.S., the government still has not taken responsibility for the illnesses in the children of Vietnam veterans. This is a fact. There were 8,000 women who served in Vietnam, and the U.S. government covers 18+ birth defects that children and women Vietnam veterans suffer from. They currently cover 1 birth defect in the children of male Vietnam veterans, and that is spina bifida. Our population has every single one of the birth defects that are on the list of the women's birth defect list, yet they claim that Agent Orange cannot be transmitted by sperm. They say that we have no rights to a claim to the VA. It's bogus, it's BS, and it's because there was 2.5 million men that served and only 8,000 women. The amount of children that are out there that need support are overwhelming, and the government is afraid to open the can of worms. This is not a this side or that side problem. It's not a Vietnam Agent Orange problem or a U.S. Agent Orange problem in the offspring. This is a humanitarian issue. This is an issue that we cannot wait for one side to be taken care of or another side to be taken care of. This is an issue where we must work together and finish the job that needs to be done and take care of the people who are suffering who did not go to war. If you do not feel that this might apply to you today, I just want you to remember that we never seem to learn to our mistakes of war. In 1995, I came home on a college visit. And I came home to my parents' small Cape Cod home, and I was in the living room, and I happened to look down on the end table. And when I did, this is what I saw. This is a Life magazine from 1995. And the cover of this magazine says, "Has our country abandoned them? Gulf War veteran, U.S. Army sergeant, and his son, Jace, aged 3. I crumpled to the floor. I said, "Not again! We cannot do this again! Can't we learn?" But these children, we don't know where they are. We don't know what has come of their lives. I know what's become of all of our lives. Please support Vorak's mission to help the children in Vietnam. Please support Children of Vietnam Veterans Health Alliance. And please support Iraq and Afghanistan veterans who are claiming that their children have been hurt by depleted uranium or burn pit exposure. Thank you. I'm sorry for my tears. They always happen. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather. Doug Hostetter served in Vietnam doing alternative service in Tam Kỳ for 3 years, from 1966 to 1969. His work has been devoted to seeking nonviolent alternatives to war and oppression in many war zones, including Vietnam, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Bosnia, Afghanistan, Iraq, and I'm sure I'm missing some. He's been involved in reconciliation, citizen diplomacy, work camps, and people-to-people exchanges. Doug is currently director of the Mennonite Central Committee, United Nations Office. Doug? Thank you.
Thank you. I, unlike most of you, were privileged to experience Vietnam in a very different way. I was fortunate to have been the child of a Mennonite minister, the grandchild of another Mennonite minister, and come from a tradition where I think I can fairly safely say none of my direct ancestors have taken another life in a war for 500 years. They have been trying to draft Mennonites and force Mennonites into military service since the 16th century. And a fundamental element of the Mennonite faith and tradition is to take the words of Jesus seriously, to love your enemies, to do good to those who hate you, and to love and pray for those who despitefully use you. So it is, we take those words seriously and will not be involved in military. I was graduating from Eastern Mennonite College in 1966, but I'd spent a couple years actually here in New York with an evangelical organization that was working with gangs here in New York, and I met lots of other young men my age. And we all realized that when we all graduated from college, we would be drafted and sent to Vietnam. And I suddenly realized that I could not, in good conscience, do my alternative service working in a hospital or a school here in the United States, but that I should also go to Vietnam to do my alternative service there. The Mennonite Central Committee is the relief service and peace organization of the Mennonite Church, and they had been sending volunteers to Vietnam for a couple of years. So I and my sister both volunteered to go and work in Vietnam doing alternative service in the middle of the war zone, in the middle of the war. I was sent to Tam Kỳ. It's about 15 kilometers north of Chu Lai Air Base, about 150 miles south of the DMZ, and was asked to find out what the people wanted to do and then help them do it. It turns out that what the people wanted most in Tam Kỳ was for their children to learn to read and write their own language. The U.S. had lost control of most of Quang Tin province about a year and a half before I came there. And as you all know, when a military loses control of an area, you destroy the infrastructure of that area. So we had bombed the schools, clinics, marketplaces, all throughout Quang Tin province in the areas that the Americans did not control. Those refugees were coming into Tam Kỳ, and because of the corruption of the Saigon government, they were not in school and were not being taken care of. So I actually started schools for these children, first in refugee camps, and then went out beyond that, using Vietnamese high school students as my teachers. It was one of the best things I ever did in my life. I ended up with 90 high school students, teaching between 3,000 and 4,000 Vietnamese children how to read and write their own language. We were very careful not to use government textbooks, not to allow propaganda or anything that would, anything more than just straight teaching children how to read and write their own language. And I was loved and respected for this. It took a little while to earn the respect. I do look pretty American, and when I first went to teach English in the schools, as I was figuring out what else I could do, I taught English in the high schools in Tam Kỳ. There would be 500 bicycles out in front of the Tranquil Van High School, and for the first couple of weeks, there was one bicycle that always had 2 flat tires at the end of the day, and it was mine. But after a few weeks, people began to realize that I was a different kind of American. And the program started in the refugee camps and then later went out first to the Soi Dao areas. Those are the rice and beans areas. Those are kind of Saigon by day and Aleph by night. And then by the time I left, we had schools in places where Americans could only travel in a tank or an armored personnel carrier, and I could go on a bicycle. In the areas, in the rural areas, we said that we would set up a school anywhere that they would provide a place for the children to study and take care of the teacher that came out there. I had recruited one of the rural villages out in the Soi Dao area, came and said, we really want a school out here. And I said, I'm really sorry, I've run out of teachers. No more kids will volunteer. The head of the village came to me and he said, you know, we need teachers more than we need soldiers. If you send a teacher to my village to teach, I will guarantee that he will not be drafted, he or she will not be drafted in either the NLF Army or the Saigon Army. We never lost a single teacher from the villages where the people guaranteed that they were going to do this. One more quick story. While I was there, I lived in Tam Kỳ outside of a military compound. I was the only American living outside of a military compound. Tam Kỳ was taken over about a dozen times while I was there, usually only for a few hours in the middle of the night. They'd come in singing songs to Ho Chi Minh, et cetera, et cetera. And then they would leave before morning. They would always attack military MACV headquarters, USAID headquarters, and the CIA headquarters, all of which were in armed compounds. I was in the village, in an unarmed place. no defense whatsoever. I was never attacked. I always kind of accredited that to the fact that God had protected me, and I had faith, and I prayed, and God really was good to me during those 3 years. This last January, I was invited back to Vietnam with a group of peace activists to go back to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the signing of the Paris Peace Accords. And I went back for the official commemorations with the president, planting a peace tree and all this kind of stuff. But I also arranged for 2 days to sneak off to go back to the village where I had worked. My best friend there had been a local artist, and he helped me understand the culture. He gave me advice on my schools and everything. And when I got back, I discovered that he had died about 4 years ago. But his kids remembered me really well. They were maybe 11 and 15 when I left, but they called me their uncle, and they welcomed me back to their home. One of them's a classical musician, plays a 32-string zither in a local traditional music ensemble, and the other one is a builder. And they welcomed me into their home, and then they started telling me their family history. I learned that my artist friend, Layden Shum, had 4 brothers. All of them were with the National Liberation Front. One of them was a very, very high-level commander. And when the war ended, he came back, and he was the province chief in the province where I had worked. And I suddenly realized that God had had some help in protecting me during the 3 years that I worked in Tam Kỳ. Thank you.
In doing an internet search to learn about some of our speakers who I didn't know previously, I discovered a piece that was written by Jenny Pekanowski about joining the Army to become a medic, to work in a hospital, and someday become a nurse. Our stories of joining the military were so very similar, only Jenny was deployed to Iraq in 2004. And the Army reneged on their promises to repay her student loans. Jenny spent 2004 in Iraq as a combat medic doing medical support for convoys. Today, she's a poet and a warrior writers facilitator. Please welcome Jenny.
Hello. Thank you. I have 10 minutes. You may want to remind me again. So I was asked to speak at this event, and the prompt, I will call it a prompt because I'm a writer and a poet, was Lessons of War. So this is what I wrote. The lessons of war, I believe, is different for everyone. I probably don't even need this thing. I've heard more than once from other veterans of all eras that war, conflict stays with you. It seeps into your soul, creates moral injury, a restlessness that is unresolvable even with time. PTSD is not curable. All week long, I've been struggling and battling with these ideas. What did I witness? What do I continue to witness as a veteran? Creating a war again, a war with myself. We bring the war home with us, but my lesson to you today is that it doesn't have to define who we are as veterans, as people, or beings in this universe. Ever since my return from Iraq, I felt that my experience in war have controlled and conquered who I was, how I reacted to people, how I view myself, and what my future would be. From 2005 to 2011, I was a victim and a prisoner to my emotions, my PTSD, my codependent relationships, and my addictions. I cannot say it was a single moment I woke up one day and said, no more. But I definitely started developing my own toolbox of coping. At first, I dealt with my reactions of anger, of not applying the sledgehammer of rage to all situations, but maybe starting smaller with a mallet of discussing what I was angry about and not just destroying everything in my path. I started fostering and training bull mastiffs. Taking care of them gave me a reason to wake up in the morning. My mother drove me to a veterans retreat in Martha's Vineyard that slowly started the change and the course of my life. This is where I first experienced a community of veterans, talking, understanding each other, writing, and creating combat paper. As the years passed, I allowed myself to grieve the loss of my idealism, my youth. My youth has been replaced with hatred and resentment for everything I thought this country once stood for. Honor, integrity, leadership, selfless service, loyalty, a fearless solidarity and defense for what is right. Soberly, finally, I cried and I released the pain without feeling weak, but empowered by my ability to break away from the conformity my mind had previously been trapped in. During these last 2 years, I discovered a map. It's going to guide me. My map started with the process of putting my needle down and stop using my extensive medical knowledge to get high and escape and become numb. I threw away my VA meds, the bottles of whiskey and vodka, and I walked away from my hope of death. I trailblazed a new path to learn how to transition from war and from the military culture, not only to do it for myself, but also, as I discovered, to be able to help others to do it also. I moved to Ithaca to expand my comfort zone and embrace the future I never thought I would live long enough to see. Working with the Veterans Sanctuary, I found healing. I found a healing approach that I disregarded because it was for hippies and tree huggers, and well, for anyone else but me. Of course, I'm talking about the holistic approach. I found a wellness chiropractor and acupuncturist. I ran, I walked with my dogs in the sunshine, the rain, and the snow. I went to parks and festivals. I farmed. I celebrated potluck dinners. I spoke to college students. We wrote, we created art and combat paper. But above all, I had a community. We created community. Thanks. So lately, I've been feeling immersed in war, and this idea of community has diminished into a job. Facilitating workshops, speaking events, outreach, even my own writing became a chore, a reminder of this failure, feeling that no matter how much I do, there is still more to be done, and I'm sure many of you feel that way. The wars go on, and the veterans continue to be misunderstood, lost, addicted, suicidal, homeless, homicidal, and traumatized by their own communities and the system set up to help them, the VA. And events like the Boston bombings validated my greatest fears of bombs blowing up in the streets of the USA. For a while, it was like finally, after searching all these years for bombs in the roads, scanning and scanning, reliving my convoy after convoy, all these years, it happened, just like it used to every day in Iraq. Now my war had truly come home, and my anger and my frustration and my despair, it broke into my core. But last night when I was writing this, I realized that in this moment of despair, I got to pull out my map again, and that this war is a part of me and it's a part of us. But it doesn't have to consume us. It doesn't have to be a burden. It doesn't have to be a huge weight to be carried. It can be a thought that drives us. Or the war can disappear completely in those moments at the playground with your kids or with your dogs at the park. My lesson about war, our lesson is to change. Challenge my mind to think differently about war, to change the way I feel about the war, to change it into something that works for me to feel great, empowered, experienced, and knowledgeable, so to not let others follow in the path that I choose. For my PTSD to kick ass instead of let it kick my ass. How many minutes do I got? So in that way, I facilitate writing workshops so others can learn and express themselves in positive ways and again create community. The lesson I learned in war is that healing is not a job. Speaking the truth is an honor, especially if I can speak for those who cannot, and writing is my gift. Most of all, for me, I had to change my perspective of my purpose. I had to forgive myself for sacrificing my humanity in war and to live and come home. Thanks.
Paula Rogovin is a member of Military Families Speak Out, mother of a Marine son who was deployed to Iraq twice. She has been a teacher of young children in the New York City schools for over 39 years. Let me just mention quickly a couple of the classes Paula teaches to first graders. One is Behind the Label. I did do an internet search on you all. It's extraordinary to me to be here this morning and to talk about you and to hear you all tell your stories. The class is Behind the Label, covering stories of people and children fighting for fundamental human and labor rights against the global clothing industry, and talking about child labor to first graders. Paula integrates social issues into the curriculum, from fair trade goods and poverty to hate crimes. Paula. Welcome this morning, and before we get started, Brian is going to give you all a little bit of an overview of the facilities and what's expected.
Yeah, hi everybody, thank you for coming. Just a couple of quick little rules: no smoking, no drinking. We're going to have some breakout sessions later on. They'll be in a room next door, and possibly upstairs we have an auditorium. Lunch, if people decide to go out and bring stuff back, they'll be able to use next door. There are a lot of restaurants and stuff in the area, so, you know, when we do break, but try to get back within an hour time period, okay? I guess that's really all. The what?
Bathrooms around
Oh, the bathrooms are over this way. So if anybody needs anything, just ask, okay? Thank you.
I'm part of the planning committee that put together this event in addition to the event for the celebration of the life of Dave Klein. And I just want to emphasize that this was an incredible group effort of folks who came together to say, we want to figure out how we can bring together veterans from Vietnam, from Korea, from Iraq, from Afghanistan. We think it's more than time for us to work together to deal with the issues that are confronting us. I'd like to against the war. Our group originally got together to plan the February 16th event to commemorate Dave's life and legacy. We worked really hard on identifying those issues that were important to Dave and on which he worked. Today's conference continues our discussion regarding what do we do now for the veterans' peace movement? Where do we as veterans go now to work on peace and social justice issues? What is it that we can bring to the movement? How is our role different from that of other activists? What can we bring together as we continue our struggle against poverty, racism, destruction of our environment, assault on our privacy, and the unfettered exercise of executive privilege involving indefinite detention and death and destruction of those our government deems as our enemy? This morning's session will focus on veterans' witness to war, patriotic myths, and rewriting history, and veterans and the politics of peace. This afternoon, we'll be discussing what veterans bring to the movement for peace and social justice, what we can do for each other. Our plan is to organize additional conferences and meetings to take up particular issues: the American way of war, past and future; veterans issues, who cares and who does not; and veterans civic action. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk, noted, "Veterans have the experience that makes them the light at the tip of the candle, illuminating the roots of war and the way to peace." So let us begin. Thank you. I really didn't pause for the applause. I couldn't find my paper. I am very much a written person, and I write We really have an extraordinary group of people this morning who will give their story of personal experience, activism, and healing, from those directly involved in combat to families of veterans. The impact of war on those left behind can be felt for generations, and it leaves behind its own special legacy, whether it's dissolution of the immediate family, joblessness, substance abuse, inability to form close, intimate bonds with others, and of course, activism. I'll begin by introducing Heather Bowser, who is an activist in the campaign to demand justice for all victims of Agent Orange. Heather is a former high school teacher and current mental health professional who uses her skills to reach out and educate others about the use of the defoliant in Vietnam. Heather believes in empowering second and third generation survivors to speak out and to use their voice to tell their stories. Her dad served in Vietnam and died at an early age as a result of his exposure to Agent Orange. His daughter, Heather, was born 2 months prematurely with multiple birth defects. Heather is a co-founder of the Children of Vietnam Veterans Health Alliance. I said that right, yes. And has been to Vietnam 3 times, exploring the Vietnamese and American sides of what it means to live with Agent Orange-related ailments. It is a pleasure for me to introduce Heather.
Good morning. 10 minutes. Thanks, Michael. I want to, we're dedicating this to Dave Klein. I also want to dedicate this to Charlie Richardson, who is a co-founder of Military Families Speak Out. He passed away on May 4th, and for anyone who would like to go to his memorial, that will be on June 29th in Boston. I have the details. I'm still crying from what Heather said. As a military mom, I don't know what my kid was exposed to. He served in Iraq twice. He was all over Iraq. He was on the border. He was in Baghdad. He was all over. I don't know what he was exposed to. I don't know what his future will be. I don't know what his children will be like. And on top of that, I'm an anti-war activist, so he won't talk to me about any of it. So there's not even a way to know. And I guess one of the things that's been important to members of Military Families Speak Out is that we have each other. We have our we support each other when our loved ones are deployed. Right now, Walt, Veterans for Peace member, his son is coming back from a third deployment. He's in Afghanistan. Hopefully next week he'll be out of there. I know all of you here know how scary it must be to have your kid with one more week in a war, or any time in a war. It's really scary. Not only you're worried about their lives, but then we worry about what happens to them when they come home. Will they have depleted uranium poisoning? Our friend Anna, whose son's been deployed 6 times, her grandkids both have deformities. He was in Fallujah. A lot of the babies in Fallujah are born with multiple birth defects. So, we worry about our own children, our grandchildren. You've heard of Carlos Arredondo, a member of Military Families Speak Out. When the military van came in front of his house a number of years ago, he thought they were bringing his son home from Iraq for his own birthday. They were coming, of course, to tell him that his son was dead. And he set his van on fire. He was injured badly, and he's spent many years now going around the country trying to get people to protest war. His son, Brian, committed suicide this year. He was the one at the Boston Marathon who helped somebody whose legs had been blown off. The one with the cowboy hat, that was Carlos. Jenny said that PTSD is not curable, and I'm sure she's right, but it's preventable. It's not curable, but it is preventable. And I have a really easy solution, a really good way to prevent it. And I'm not a therapist, and I'm not a psychologist. But if we end these damn wars, we won't be faced with the kinds of things that people are talking about here, whether it's birth deformities, birth defects, PTSD. We've got to cut the military budget. We've got to end the wars, and we've got to use all the energy we have to work on the various issues that we are working on, but also cutting the military budget and ending the wars. Military families are facing breakups, many breakups of the families, high unemployment, medical issues, housing problems, limitations of the GI Bill, high suicide rate, military sexual trauma that's facing loved ones who've been deployed. And I've had some discussions about this because this issue is making me very angry and very irritated, and I think we have to address it. Because in Vietnam, in the wars that go all the way back through history, there was always somebody you could rape. There was always some woman, the enemy's women, the so-called enemy, the women, the wives, the daughters. All through history, they were raped by soldiers. Right? They were raped by soldiers. So this thing of military sexual trauma has changed the formula because we have women in the military. So they're the victims now. So we've got to address this whole issue. It's a very important issue. Anyway, I have not much time and a few things I want to say. We need to address all these multiple issues, and the VA backlog is so long. It's over a year of waiting time. There are over 1 million people on that list trying to get their claims processed. That's a big issue. It's something we really have to work on. Let me just give an example of something we're doing in our area in Teaneck, New Jersey. And there's several people from our actions here. We have a vigil in Teaneck every single Wednesday for almost 8 years now at the Armory. That vigil is sponsored by Veterans for Peace, Chapter 21, New Jersey, Military Families Speak Out, and lots of area residents. Every single Wednesday. It's been large, it's been small, sometimes it's 15 people, sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's 80. But we've been plugging away, and I believe that vigil has given birth, that coalition of people has given birth to so many activists. And I'm so excited about that. There are people in here who hadn't been activists on any issue, and now who are marching around the world in anti-war activities, who are leading Veterans for Peace chapters, who are organizing cultural events, poetry readings, who are working with warrior writers, who are working with vets in the Combat Paper Project, and who are, really they've become organizers. I would like to encourage people, if you're not hooked up with some kind of a vigil is a wonderful beginning point for organizing locally, working in coalition. This coming Memorial Week, on Memorial Day, there's a Combat Paper Project in our town. There's going to be a display, and people will be learning about Combat Paper Project. Then during the week at our vigil, we're going to have a speak out ending the VA backlog. And we have some school children from an elementary school, not my school, a school in New Jersey, and they have a peace club. And I spoke with them a few weeks ago, and they're coming back to our vigil, and they're bringing lots and lots of food and diapers and other supplies for the military. And I had to explain to them, if we support the troops, that rah-rah, support the troops, remember that? Love the troops, support the troops. Why would we have to collect diapers and food for the families of our soldiers and Marines? And so we had to explain to them. So they're organizing their whole school to collect food and to collect signatures on the VA backlog issue. Why should our veterans, why should our soldiers have to worry about those issues? Why shouldn't the government just go and help them with their problems? So we had to explain that to 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds. And it's really important that we find every opportunity, every opportunity to work with adults, to work with children, to work with teenagers, and bring people together around these important issues. But thank you.
We actually wanted to be able to provide opportunity for everybody to participate in this morning's session. So please think about questions you might want to ask one of the speakers. It's your chance. And part of putting this conference together was to figure out how we could organize and how we could all talk together as a group about the issues that we're confronted with. So, questions from the floor to any one of our speakers, please. I'm sorry? Oh, yes, please. Yes, come on. It might be easier. Anybody have a question or a statement? Or an issue? No? Frank.
Test. Have an organization?
Ask the full question.
Oh, how can we support your organization?
Well, we got some.
Yeah.
CovHA is around a year old. We are a state-certified nonprofit organization, and we are in the process, actually, within this week of completing our paperwork that'll be sent to the IRS. We take donations, and we will be using that money to help support an international fight of Agent Orange. So, and also in the vestibule, there are some flyers, and those flyers have some tear-offs at the bottom, if you can put them in your local grocery stores, those kinds of things. Our website is COVVHA, CovHA, and on our website is a wealth of information, and flyers are set up on our website and stuff where you can print them and they're in color. Those ones are kind of sketchy. CovHA right now is focused on children of Vietnam veterans and the grandchildren of Vietnam veterans. One of the things I did not mention in my speech is that we're seeing transgenerational effects, just like we see in Vietnam, of generations. However, there is movement. If you look on social media and things, there's specifically a group called Vietnam Veterans and Burn Pit Veterans. So that's something. And also, I would suggest that this movement has to come from you guys as the people who have served in Afghanistan and in Iraq. Start organizing, start talking about this. Don't let it be in the shadows. If you know people, support them and try to help them become active in the cause, because unless they speak out, no one will know.
Could you just explain a little bit what the combat papers are and what the writing projects are exactly?
I'll start with the easier one first. Warrior Writers is primarily an all veterans group of all eras, and we get together in workshops. We meet from 2 to 3 hours usually, and we write together. Usually the facilitator, depending on who it is, gives writing prompts, and it opens the door for conversation and in a safe environment, and the facilitator will mediate open conversation, but not critical or even not political. It just helps everyone to keep an open mind, to share their experiences, to share their emotions, to have conversations they can't have with their family, with their friends, that they can only have with other veterans, primarily. And they can also write it down and then take it to the next level of performing or publishing. We have a couple anthologies, and I have a couple flyers also out on the table out there, and it's warriorwriters.org. So the Combat Paper Project is, we take our uniforms and, or other people's uniforms. It's become a very collaborative project, and we cut them up into tiny pieces, and we turn them into handmade paper. We put them in a machine called a beater, and what's that word I'm looking for? Eviscerate them. It turns into a pulp with water. And then you drain the water out, and your uniform becomes actual paper that you can put photo images on. You can we make journals and books out of them. We've taught people how to bookbind. The Combat Paper Project is combatpaper.com or org also. And it's a really, it's a reclaiming process. Like your uniform becomes your identity, or who you are, and conforms your decisions, and cutting it up and reclaiming it as yours, and putting your thoughts and your feelings about the war, about yourself, about anything, surprisingly frees you in many ways. So that's Combat Paper.
There are a few people here who are very active with the Combat Paper Project in New Jersey, Walt Nygaard, Jan Barry. There is currently an exhibit of work from the Combat Paper Project. It's fabulous. It's in Somerville, New Jersey until end of the month. On July 13th in Teaneck, New Jersey at the Puffin Cultural Forum, there will be an exhibit called Scars and Stitches, and it's an exhibit of combat paper artwork and poetry, and please come to that. John Potter, thank you all.
Let me first talk about the Christmas bombing, because there's a big contingent out there who still focus and fixate on the idea that the Christmas bombing won the war in some fundamental sense, right? In point of fact, the Christmas bombing didn't do anything. The United States, at that moment in 1972, faced a situation where it wasn't really negotiating with Hanoi, it was negotiating with Saigon. It was Nguyen Van Thu who refused to sign the ceasefire agreement that the Americans had worked out with the North Vietnamese. And the point of the Christmas bombing, the central point of it, was to convince Nguyen Van Thu that the United States would come to his aid if, in fact, Hanoi backed out of what it was agreeing to do under the ceasefire. There's cable traffic between Kissinger and Nixon that explicitly says, you know, I have a hard time justifying bombing North Vietnam if Saigon is the holdout. And a line-by-line analysis of the projected agreement from October 1972 and the agreement that was actually signed in Paris in January of 1973 shows that only minor and cosmetic changes were made to the agreement, and the ones that were made were in favor of Hanoi. So what the Christmas bombing accomplished as a diplomatic tool was nil. And as for what it accomplished as a military mission, well, you know, we had been bombing North Vietnam in this way for many years, many times, in many kinds of ways, and that bombing didn't construct or affect anything other than those other attempts. As for what it accomplished in the United States, it created a firestorm. I was at another conference venue one time with Alexander Haig, who of course was right in the middle of the White House when all of this went down. And he stood up before the audience and said, the Christmas bombing was a great thing. If we'd only been able to continue it for another 6 months, we would have won the war. But everybody wanted to impeach us. And that was the central point. The United States politics were so roiled by what Nixon was doing in that very moment in time that had they attempted to pursue the Christmas bombing another 6 months, not only would the B-52 pilots have refused to fly, but Nixon and his characters would have been driven out of town.